Pretty nifty lick, huh? The key to that lick is to utilize a few different bend techniques. And that's exactly what we're going to go over in today's lesson. I'm going to show you how to properly bend a string and how to combine those bends with other techniques so that you can create your own tasty little licks. Let's dive into it. All right, so before we begin, let's all just make sure we know what a bend actually is. A bend is when we take a string on our guitar and physically push the string up, or maybe sometimes down. Doing this makes the pitch of the note we are playing rise. Let's hear that again. Note got higher, right? Sometimes we play small bends, raising the pitch maybe just a quarter or half tone. Or sometimes we really crank the string, yielding a whole step or sometimes even a 2 whole step bend. Either way, bends require a little bit of strength, coordination, and a lot of technique. It's also very important to use your ear and listen closely, as we are going to want to keep our bends in tune. And actually, sometimes we might want them to be slightly out of tune on purpose. So let's start with the basic technique. And let's first try to bend the 2nd string, or our B string. So what I want you to do is I want you to find the 8th fret of your 2nd string. That's the note G. And let's play that with our 1st finger. Then I want you to try to push the string up and then maybe down. It might not be that easy, right? Sometimes we use our 1st finger to play smaller bends, but we will have more range and control if we use some other fingers. So let's now try doing the same thing, but with our 2nd finger. So I'm pushing up, then I'm gonna pull down. Might be a little easier, right? Middle finger tends to be your strongest and most bouncy finger on your hand. But now let's play that bend with our 2nd finger again. But let's also put our 1st finger behind our 2nd finger. Doing so will give us the power of 2 fingers bending the string versus 1 finger. We call this reinforcing the bend. Once you have both fingers on the same string, push the string in and then slightly up. Oh, way easier. Now let's do that same thing, but let's put our 3rd finger, our ring finger, on the 8th fret, and then put the 1st and 2nd fingers behind it. Now we have the power of 3 fingers on our bend. So sometimes we bend only with our 1st finger, but that limits how far we can bend the string. Sometimes we use our 2nd finger reinforced with our 1st finger, which gives us a little bit more range and feels way more secure. And I'd say most of the time we are bending with our 3rd finger while reinforcing with the 1st and 2nd finger. This puts us in a powerful position and allows us the most control and range with our bends. The first time we ever try a bend, we usually think about just pushing the string up. Now we definitely want to coax the string up towards the sky, but it's more important to keep pushing the string into the fretboard. Otherwise, you won't make a sound at all. So here's the progression I tell my students to go through when they are practicing their bends. Start with your 3rd finger on the note you want to bend. I'm going to use the 8th fret on the 2nd string again, that note G. Set up the reinforcement with your 1st and 2nd fingers so that they are on the same string and right up against the 3rd finger. Because the 1st and 2nd fingers are behind the 3rd finger, they won't actually affect the pitch. They are merely there for support and strength. Then try to bring your thumb up from behind the neck so that it's peeking out from above the neck. Everyone's hands are different shapes and sizes, so do your best on this even if your thumb doesn't quite look like mine does here. The idea of this is to add more support to your fingers and put your wrist at a proper and safe angle. We want our wrist high, not down low when bending. Now imagine you are trying to break through the back of the neck of the guitar with that 3rd finger. In other words, keep pushing in to the point where your finger can't go in anymore. And if they can't keep going in, they have to go somewhere, right? So now this is when we want to gently encourage them to go up. But my point is that I don't want you just thinking about pushing up on the string. The strength in our bends comes from pushing in first and using technique and angles to get the string to bend upwards. So the one thing that I get from my students a lot is this, is they say, hey Pete, when I start bending the string higher and higher, the other strings get in the way, right? Like the third and fourth strings are in my way if I'm trying to bend the second string. So what should you do about that? The answer is simple, and it's just to keep pushing them up with the second string, okay? So what we don't want is our fingers going underneath, like kind of that happens. Right? You definitely don't want that happening. And like I've been saying, this may seem hard, but bends are hard. So go slow and focus on the technique. And slowly but surely, if you maintain proper technique, you're gonna get stronger and the bends will get easier and easier and easier. All right, so let's talk about tuning. I wanna talk about keeping our bends in tune and going for the right pitch. There are different size bends, or smaller and larger intervals that we can reach with our bends. Here's a few of the basic ones. A quarter bend or smear, a half bend, a whole step bend, a 1.5 step bend, and then a grand bend or a 2 whole step bend. Let's start with half and whole step bends first. With each bend we play, we start with our original note or pitch, and then we have our target note or pitch. The original note is the pitch we hear before bending the string, and the target is the note we are bending to. So when we encounter a half bend or a half step bend, that means we want to bend the original note up exactly 1/2 step. Let's go back to the 8th fret on the second string, our note G. If we go up 1/2 step, we would be playing G sharp or A flat. In order to move up 1/2 step, we need to move up 1 fret. Thus, G sharp or A flat can be played on the 9th fret. That is now our target note. In order to reach that note with the bend, we will place our 3rd finger on the 8th fret and bend the string just enough so that the G sharp sounds instead of G natural. So go ahead and try that now on your own and check the tuning of the bend by playing the 9th fret and then doing the half bend on the 8th fret. You want them to be as close to in tune as possible. So like this, right? 9th fret, that's G sharp. I'm gonna take G and bend it to G sharp. Oh, it's a little flat. One of the cool things about bends is that they convey a slightly detuned feeling, which is cool and pretty much exactly what we are after when we're bending our strings. However, that doesn't mean we want our bends to be completely out of tune and sound like a 1st grade recorder recital. Okay, so on to whole step bends. Using the info from a half step bend, you can probably assume what a whole step bend is. It's when we bend a note up to a target pitch that is exactly 1 whole step or 2 frets above our original note. So if I'm back on G, 2nd string, we love this note today. I want to play that 8th fret and then bend it up so that it matches the note A, which would be 2 frets up on the 10th fret. Pretty simple concept, but significantly harder to do, especially for those of us playing steel string acoustic guitars. Anyways, here's that whole step bend. So A is my target, G, checks out, pretty cool. Okay, so when doing a half step bend, we want to target a note that's 1 fret up from our original note. When doing a whole step bend, we're targeting 2 frets up. So when we need to do a 1.5 step bend, we need to target 3 frets up. And a grand bend, which is when we bend 2 full whole steps, we need to target 4 frets up. So I'm going to demo those 2 larger bends now. And again, it might be very challenging to pull these off if you are trying this for the first time. So now would be a great time for me to tell you to take it easy. We put a lot of stress on our wrist and our tendons in the fingers when we bend. Doing too many bends or trying to grand bend without warming up properly can cause injuries and set up bad habits. So make sure you take it slow with these techniques and only go for the challenging stuff when you have warmed up properly with some scales or finger exercises. Here is the 1.5 step bend. So I'm gonna do it off G again. So there's G, 1, 2, 3, that's B flat. That's my target. Got it. All right, so now let's do the grand bend. Yikes. All right, let's see if I got it today. I think I do. All right, so 8, we're gonna go to 12. Whoa, so I'm bending my note G up to B natural. And just look at my hand right now. Look where my wrist is. It's up, it's not down. I'm not like pushing like this. And my thumb is coming over in order to make that happen. As your thumb goes down and your wrist comes up, right? And as your fingers come up, your wrist goes down. It's just how your body works. So just check that position out again. I just want you to see that. So when I'm really cranking, like I'm really cupping the guitar, okay? And I'm pushing in a lot and then up. All right, so what about this quarter step business that we haven't gone over yet? People that follow this channel may have heard me say that the half step is the smallest interval in music. Now, this is partially true. In Western music, we don't recognize a quarter step as an interval. But as we know, pitch can waver and we can be slightly out of tune. When we are out of tune, what we are hearing is two pitches that are fractions of a step off from each other. If you're familiar with more Eastern music, especially music from India, they actually use a lot of quarter tones in their music, but that's a whole nother topic. So when doing a quarter bend, we want to put our original note out of tune by bending the string ever so slightly. A quarter step bend would be exactly halfway to a half step bend. But the idea is just to push the string a little out of tune here. Other names for this bend are smear or detuned bend. I actually like those names a little bit better as they do a better job describing what we are actually trying to do with the quarter step bend. That said, you will see these bends notated in sheet music with the quarter marking and then an upward arrow. I'll put that on the screen for you. And in fact, now is a great time to show you how all these bends are notated. Here's that quarter step bend, or the smear. So here's my half bend. So I just don't want to go that far. I just want to go a little bit. That's a good quarter bend. At this point, we should feel good about bending our strings with our third finger and reinforcing it with our first and second finger. Let's just quickly touch on some instances when you might want to bend strings a little differently or with other fingers. Sometimes we bend with our first finger. This usually occurs when we're coming off of our third finger and then bending, kind of like this. That would make less sense. It's more efficient to just, or you may be playing a little blues lick. Okay? Now doing larger bends with our first finger is tough, but getting a half bend, like kind of what I just did, should be totally in reach. The idea with the first finger bends is to pull the string down towards the floor versus pushing it up to the sky. The crux of this technique is to get the wrist to rotate internally so that your pinky fans down or out towards the ground. Then all we need is a slight tug with our first finger downwards. So try that out. Try it on that 5th fret of the 3rd string, like this. So I'm here. See how I just kind of open my wrist? Maybe it's hard to see behind my neck, but bends with the second finger can be done the same way, except I find it very useful to reinforce the second finger with the first. So that said, second finger bends can also go up by pushing on the string instead of pulling. Definitely reinforce here. The technique in this case of pushing is the same as the third finger. Second finger bends are great when you are down in the low frets and on thicker strings, like maybe this. Or so as we've discussed, we sometimes want to bend or pull a string down towards the floor instead of pushing it up. This is common with first and second finger bends, but we sometimes want to pull down when using our third finger as well. This is typically done when bending strings 4, 5, or 6. Depending on the situation, our fourth string can go up or down, but the fifth and sixth string, almost exclusively, you want to pull them down when bending, like this. If you try to bend the fifth or sixth string up, you'll quickly see why. For starters, if I bend the fifth or sixth string up, I might take the string off the neck. Whoa! Also, as my fingers move up the strings, my wrist gets lower, making it harder to push, but easier to pull. So even with these bad boys, I'm still gonna reinforce my bend. So I'm gonna go 5th fret on my 5th string. I'm gonna use my 3rd finger. So my thumb's peeking out, wrist is high, and then I'm gonna pull down. Pull down. Now we know we can bend with our first 3 fingers, but what about our poor little pinky finger? Yeah, you can bend with that guy too. And when you do, you want to reinforce with the 2nd and 3rd fingers. All other rules apply, same rules, all right? With the wrist and the thumb and the pushing in, all that, okay? Now you can have your first finger on the string as well, but as you'll see, we usually do these 4th finger bends when we're doing a double stop or unison bend, which requires us to have our first finger somewhere else, which is actually a great segue to talking about some combo bends and some other things that we can do with bends. Like with most techniques and tricks we learn on our guitar, we want to be able to use them in the context of a song or solo. This means we need to combine them with other techniques and licks. So what I'm going to do now is show you some common bend combinations, situations you might find yourself in when bending. So first up is the bend, release, pull, or as a student of mine aptly named, the BRP. It requires a bend, a release, and then a pull off, all in one motion. It looks like this. To do this, let's start on the 7th fret of our 3rd string using our 3rd finger. Step 2 is to bend that note. Step 3 is to release the bend. Releasing the bend means just bringing the 3rd finger back to equilibrium, back to where it started. Then once you have that, you pull off the 3rd finger to the 1st finger, which should be on your 5th fret. In order to do this, it's helpful to separate your 1st finger a bit so that it's already in the 5th fret when doing a bend. So not like this, maybe like this. And once you've completed those steps, you have played the BRP. And once you have that, you can try then picking the 7th fret of the 4th string, which would give you a super common blues lick. Something like this. To add another degree of difficulty and make it sound smoother and more legato, try left hand tapping onto the 7th fret of the 4th string instead of picking it. So left hand tapping means just tapping the note with your finger, don't pick. So if you can do that, you essentially can play 5 notes in a row with 1 pick stroke, which is pretty cool, right? So note, bend, release, pull, tap. Whoa. Another way to do that is to make it really just like kind of 4 notes by pre-bending the 1st note. So a pre-bend is when you hit the string while it's already up, or kind of you bend simultaneously while picking the string. Here's the BRP using a regular bend, and then I'll play it using a pre-bend, and you'll hear a slight difference. So that's with the regular bend, release, and now here's a pre-bend. So regular bend, pre-bend. It's subtle, I know, but pay attention to detail. As musicians and artists, we want to take care of every little sound that comes out of our guitar and our amp. It's also part of your instrument. Here's how a pre-bend is notated. So another cool thing to do with bends is to do double stop and triple stop bends. A double stop is when we strike 2 strings at once, and a triple stop is 3 strings at once. So a double stop bend is when we bend 1 string and then play a string below it, or when we bend 2 strings at once. Let me show you a double stop bend with only 1 bent string first. So let's go back to our 7th fret on the 3rd string, and let's try to get it up for a whole step bend on this one, all right? So, targeting that note. Okay, so now while holding this bend, place your 4th finger on the 8th fret of the 2nd string. That's your pinky. Then, hit both the bent 3rd string and 2nd string at the same time, or alternate between them. Or... To make it harder, turn that double stop bend into a triple stop bend by barring the pinky over the 1st and 2nd strings, like this. So I'm barring, 7th fret, crank. All right, so a very specific kind of double stop bend is used quite often, and that's the unison bend. A unison bend is when we bend a string up to a target note and then play that same target note on another unbent string. So if I go back and play the 7th fret on my 3rd string, that note is D. The note E is on this 9th fret of my 3rd string, up 2 frets, but it's also on the 5th fret of my 2nd string. All right, here that's the same note, E. That means I can bend the 7th fret on the 3rd string up a whole step so that I'm now playing E. And then while holding that bend, I can play the note E again by putting my 1st finger on the 5th fret of the 2nd string. When doing this, I will only be reinforcing the bend with my 2nd finger, but we gotta do what we gotta do to get the sound we want, right? So once again, it looks and sounds like this. And this one's kind of easy to tune, because you're playing the same note. I went out of tune, sharp, 2 flat. But it's kind of cool to kind of do that effect, right? Like. Now we can also bar the 1st finger down on this unison bend so that it covers the 1st string as well on the 5th fret. This note is A, so it isn't unison, but there's still unison between the 3rd and 2nd strings. So I'm gonna show you a lick right now, and lots of people call this the Chuck Berry lick, as he made it popular way back in the day. But everyone from Eddie Van Halen to Jimi Hendrix has used this lick, and here's just a couple of cool variations of it, right? So here's kind of triple stopping. Or one note at a time. So you've probably heard a lick like that before, right? And if you haven't, you can check out some of these songs. You can check out the guitar solo from Johnny B. Good, which is Chuck Berry. Another really classic one is Highway to Hell by AC/DC. They start the solo with that lick, paying homage to Chuck Berry. But you can also do a really cool lick that Eddie Van Halen plays on Panama, this Panama solo, okay? The opening lick from the Panama solo is he does the Chuck Berry lick and then goes into a BRP, bend, release, pull, okay? It's pretty cool. So for this one, let's do it in B minor. So we're gonna come up to the 9th fret. 1st finger will be on the 7th fret, ring finger on the 9th fret. And so this is what he does. So it's unison bend with the extra triple stop note. Bend, hold, release, pull. Okay, and then I just bend the 9th fret again after picking the 9th and 7th fret. So. Another common way to employ a unison bend is to do it between the 2nd and the 1st strings. So let's try this by putting our 3rd finger on the 8th fret of the 2nd string, our note G. Yes, I know I am using this note a lot today. We want to bend this note up a whole step to the note A, which is the 10th fret on the second string. Or as we just went over, doing the Chuck Berry lick, it's also the 5th fret on the first string. The first thing you're going to notice is that the gap here is wider than it was between the second and third strings, right? It was only 2 frets when we were unison bending here. But between second and first strings, it's 3 frets. If this gap feels really wide, go ahead and try to bend the second string with your 4th finger instead. But ideally, we want to be able to do this with both the 3rd and the 4th finger. So here it is with 3rd finger. Here it is with 4th finger. Now, before I show you how to bend 2 strings at the same time, I want to point out that most of the licks that I've been using as kind of demonstrations in this lesson were played using the first shape of the A minor pentatonic scale, right? I've been in here a lot. If you've watched my previous videos on pentatonics, you can combine your knowledge to transpose some of these bend licks. In other words, you can move them to different frets and play them in different keys. If that concept went over your head, then I recommend checking out my video series on pentatonics. Link is below. All right, so the last kind of double stop bend I want to show you is when we bend 2 strings at once. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. The first way is by using 2 different fingers. Let's set up an A minor again, all right? A minor pentatonic. 3rd finger's on the 7th fret, 3rd string. Pinky on the 8th fret, 2nd string. Now place 1st and 2nd fingers behind the 3rd finger in order to reinforce it. 4th finger is not being reinforced here, but we're only going to bend up a half step, all right? And you can actually get a little reinforcement on that 2nd string if you kind of bar your 1st finger down a little, but don't get too crazy here. So here's just a little half step bend. All right, so now let's bend 2 strings with 1 finger. For this, we're gonna borrow a note from outside the A minor pentatonic scale. We're gonna play the note F sharp, which is the 7th fret on the 2nd string, which we are borrowing from the A Dorian mode. I will devote a whole series to modes of the major scale, which the Dorian mode is 1. But just know we are combining scales here. So 3rd finger to that 7th fret of the 2nd string, and we also want our 3rd finger covering the 7th fret of the 3rd string. So we're making a partial bar with our 3rd finger in order to do this. Now when I go to reinforce my 3rd finger, I will slightly bar my 2nd and 1st fingers as well. See that? Then I focus on pushing in and slightly up with my ring finger after picking both strings. Start with a half bend and work your way up. Once you got that, try incorporating the double stop bend with 1 finger into a BRP. Getting crazy. Okay, so that's it for now. I will make a supplemental video going over some fun licks you can play with these bends, in addition to the few I've included in this lesson. Thank you very much for watching, and if you like the video, please hit subscribe and like, and share with your guitar playing friends. Feel free to leave a comment below to ask a question, request a new video topic, or simply just to leave me any feedback you'd like to share. Always welcomed. I wish you all happy practicing and hope to see you all back here again soon. Much love and peace.